Camouflage trunks. He is fighting out of and representing his home of Baltimore, Maryland.
So guys, on cue, middle rounds.
Here's the corner. Frank should not be in there. We were talking about that. He's just setting himself up for...
Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis 2025 fight was a brutal collision of power, pride, and pure chaos. On September 30th, the world watched as hype met a knockout machine and one man was left broken under the lights. This was Tank Davis reminding everyone that nightmares come with a left hand.
Nah, I'm not shocked. I mean, his last fight when he fought Lamont, Jake Paul was at the fight. He told y'all he was going to fight somebody like Jake Paul, so I'm not shocked.
September 30th, 2025, Atlanta, Georgia. A night already carved into boxing history before the first punch was even thrown. The fight everyone had been waiting for. The collision between the undefeated knockout king, Gervonta Tank Davis, and the sport's biggest disruptor, Jake Paul.
Is this becoming a recipe for disaster for Tank Davis?
The atmosphere inside the State Farm Arena was beyond electric. It wasn't just noise, it was raw tension, every fan on edge, every camera flashing. You could feel the pressure in the air like heavy static. Boxing fans around the globe tuned in, knowing this was either going to be the crowning moment of a champion or the ultimate shocker pulled off by the problem child.
As we all know, as a competitive sport boxing fan, this is nonsense. It doesn't make any sense for the sport, for Tank as a world champion fighting Jake Paul.
That is, if I'm not mistaken, a 92-pound weight difference. Almost a 100-pound weight difference.
On one side stood Gervonta Davis, 24 wins, no losses, 23 of them knockouts. Born in Baltimore, raised in the toughest neighborhoods, Tank wasn't supposed to make it this far. He grew up in violence, foster homes, and a system that didn't believe in him. He had already conquered 2 divisions, holding the WBA super featherweight and WBA lightweight titles at the same time. To the crowd in Atlanta, he wasn't just a boxer. He was a symbol of grit, a man who had taken every hardship and turned it into a weapon.
This fight is looking like through the eyes of at least one of the guys in it, because as of right now, Gervonta Tank Davis has said nothing. He has said not a lick about this fight. On the other hand, the master marketer that he is, has already dropped a video called "I'm Fighting Gervonta Davis."
And across from him, the most unlikely challenger the sport has ever seen, Jake Paul. 10 wins, 1 loss, 7 knockouts. Once laughed at as a YouTuber clowning around online, now standing in the center of the ring against one of boxing's most dangerous fighters. His rise had been chaotic, polarizing, but undeniable. He shocked the world earlier in 2025 when he defeated Mike Tyson. Yes, Mike Tyson, in a fight that split fans down the middle. Some called it a spectacle, others called it robbery, but Jake's hand was raised, and that was all that mattered. That win put him in conversations no one thought he'd ever belong in.
Let's say he comes in at 200 pounds. It's still a 65-pound weight advantage, okay? They're smaller guys, but for 5'5", they'll pack a good punch. Typically, they're mixed martial artists or boxers, yeah. But when you're a boxer, that's 6'1", that's only had 1 loss on the record. Of course, Tommy Fury doesn't want to face him again.
From Cleveland, Ohio, Paul had rebranded himself from internet prankster to serious contender. He wasn't just throwing himself into fights blindly anymore. He trained like a professional, surrounded himself with elite coaches, and treated every fight as a business move and a legacy move. To his fans, he was the modern rebel shaking up a sport that had grown too rigid. To his critics, he was a fraud. A man with marketing skills but without true boxing substance. But love him or hate him, he forced himself into the spotlight. And now, on September 30th, he was staring down the most feared puncher in his weight range.
Think about it, and the more I think about the position of Jake Paul, of Tank Davis, and how each of them are coming into this fight, the more I start to also wonder, is Tank Davis taking Jake Paul seriously?
The crowd split in half chanting for Tank, the other half screaming for Paul. It felt less like a boxing event and more like a cultural war. Tradition versus disruption, legacy versus spectacle. The walkouts set the tone. Gervonta Tank Davis came out first, draped in white trunks with yellow and silver trim, his stare cold and unshakable. No smiles, no playing to the crowd. He walked to the ring like an executioner, ready to deliver another highlight reel knockout. He had done it 23 times before, and tonight he promised to add Jake Paul to that list. Then came Jake, silver and chrome trunks gleaming under the lights. His walkout was loud, chaotic, fireworks firing, the crowd either booing or roaring. He thrived off it. The hate fueled him as much as the love did. He carried himself like a man who belonged there, whether people believed it or not. For Jake Paul, this wasn't just another fight. This was validation. When both men finally stood across from each other, the arena fell into that eerie silence just before chaos. The referee brought them in. The stare down was brutal, Tank glaring at Jake as if sizing up prey. Jake, taller and bigger, refused to blink. The bell rang. Round 1.
Come up. Tank.
Tank came out like a storm. No testing, no feeling out. His footwork was sharp, cutting off the ring immediately. He stalked Jake, waiting for the opening to unleash that deadly left hand. Davis had built his career on fast starts and explosive finishes, and this was no different. Jake stayed composed, pumping his jab, using every inch of his reach. At 6'1", he towered over the 5'5" Davis. That height and reach advantage were supposed to be his shield, and he used it early. Stiff jab, step back, reset. He didn't rush. He didn't swing wild. He looked like a man who knew exactly what kind of monster was in front of him. 2 minutes into the round, Tank struck first. A lightning-fast left hook crashed onto Jake's jaw. The sound echoed through the arena. Jake's head snapped back, and for a second the crowd gasped, waiting to see if he would fall. But Paul stood tall. He nodded, smirked, and motioned for Tank to bring more. The audacity stunned everyone. Tank didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, hammering body shots, ripping hooks to the ribs, trying to fold Jake early. That's when Paul fired back. A straight right hand, clean and heavy, landed flush on Davis's chin. For a split second, Tank froze, absorbing it. The crowd roared, shocked. Jake Paul had landed on one of the most dangerous fighters alive, and Tank had felt it. The arena erupted into chaos. The commentators couldn't believe what they were seeing. Davis, the knockout king, meeting resistance from a man who wasn't supposed to belong. Jake Paul didn't run. He didn't fold. He stood in the pocket and fired.
Final 60 seconds as we are in the 6th round. Let's see what happens, because the words are being thrown at each other. Let's see if the punches start being thrown.
The round closed with both men trading. Tank cutting off the ring, Jake countering with jabs and rights. When the bell rang, neither man looked shaken. Davis walked back to his corner with his usual calm menace. Paul walked back nodding as if to say, "I'm still here." For many, that first round alone was proof enough. This wasn't just spectacle, this was a real fight. Tank Davis had landed clean and Jake Paul hadn't gone down. Jake Paul had fired back and Tank had felt it. Then came the shot that made time stand still. Midway through the round, Jake Paul uncorked a thunderous right hand. Not a lazy jab, not a half-hearted swing, but a full extension cannon of a punch. And it landed. Square, clean, right on Gervonta Davis's chin.
Again, Chavez looked like he's struggling with his footwork.
Oh, big right from Paul. And you can see the red markings now on the face of Chavez Jr.
For a split second, Tank froze. His legs stiffened, his eyes blinked. The undefeated knockout king, the man who had made careers disappear with one left hand, was stunned, and the crowd lost its mind. You could hear people screaming in disbelief, spilling drinks, jumping on chairs. "Jake Paul just rocked Tank Davis," became the line of the night.
Again, Chavez looked like he's struggling with his footwork.
Oh, big right from Paul. And you can see the red markings now on the face of Chavez Jr.
But here's the thing about Gervonta Tank Davis. He's built for war. You can hit him, you can make him stumble, but you better be ready for what comes next. Because Tank doesn't retreat, he retaliates. And retaliate he did. Tank dug into Jake's ribs with body shots so vicious they echoed around the arena like shotgun blasts. Left to the liver, right to the solar plexus, another ripping hook underneath the elbow. Jake suddenly wasn't marching forward anymore. He was backpedaling, arms tight, gasping for air. The look on his face said it all. Those body shots hurt in ways you can't describe unless you've felt them. The balance of power shifted instantly. One moment, Jake had the crowd screaming in his favor. The next, Tank reminded everyone why he's one of the most feared finishers alive. Championship experience isn't about being perfect, it's about knowing how to take a moment of chaos and flip it back in your favor, and Tank flipped it like only he can.
That heartbeat, there's a right
Good
hand.
right hand. They're just far in between.
Still, Jake didn't go down. He survived the round. He gritted his teeth, raised his gloves, and stayed in the fight. And that was enough to keep people glued to their screens, wondering if this was going to become one of the greatest upsets in boxing history. The tension inside the arena wasn't just high, it was unbearable. Was this hype? Was this smoke and mirrors? Or was Jake Paul really about to shock the entire sport? Round 3 began. And that's when history was written. Tank Davis came out laser-focused. The smirk was gone. The patience was gone. He had tested Paul. He had felt his power. Now it was time to end the experiment. Paul circled cautiously, his jab flicking out, but his footwork was just a half step too slow. And against a predator like Davis, one half step is fatal. 2 minutes into the round, Tank baited him. He dipped to the right, as if aiming for another brutal body shot. Jake lowered his guard, just for a split second, expecting the rib-crushing hook. And that's when it happened. Tank unleashed his trademark weapon, the left uppercut. It was lightning in a bottle. The punch came from the floor, slicing through Jake's guard, detonating on his chin with violent precision. You could hear the impact over the crowd, over the commentary, over everything. The sound of a perfectly placed shot that no man on earth could survive. Jake Paul's body went limp before he even hit the canvas. His silver trunks crumpled under the lights, his arms sprawled wide, his head bouncing off the mat. The arena exploded in chaos. Half the fans screamed in horror, the other half roared in triumph. It was the kind of knockout that replays on loop in your head whether you want it to or not. The referee didn't even bother with a full 10 count. He waved it off. It was over. Officially, brutally, completely over.
Like, yeah, I'll do it, but also I'm gonna, and again, Jake's only been boxing for 5, 6, 7 years now. It isn't necessarily far-fetched to try to have his own advantages when trying to fight other boxers.
And yet, what made it all so shocking wasn't just that Tank knocked Jake out. Everyone knew Tank had the ability to end it at any moment. The shock was that Jake Paul dared to step in there, dared to swing, dared to land on Tank Davis, and actually made it a fight before the inevitable ending. By the end of the night, the knockout was already being called one of the most iconic highlights of 2025. It was violent, it was dramatic, and it was unforgettable. Twitter flooded with clips. Fans argued non-stop. Some mocked Paul for daring to test Davis. Others praised him for surviving as long as he did. But no one, not one person, could deny that the world had just witnessed something historic. On September 30th, 2025, Gervonta Tank Davis reminded the boxing world why his name sends shivers through opponents. And Jake Paul? He walked out on a stretcher, yes, but he walked out with something he never had before. Respect. The fight may have ended in the 3rd round, but the story didn't stop when Jake Paul hit the canvas. If anything, that's when things got even wilder. Tank Davis, standing in the center of the ring, chest heaving, gloves still dripping with sweat, looked straight into the camera and screamed, "I told you I'd beat the brakes off him!" No smiles, no jokes, just pure Baltimore fury. He didn't just knock Jake Paul out, he wanted the world to know this was personal. This was a warning to anyone else thinking they could turn boxing into a playground. On the other side, Jake Paul was bloodied, bruised, but not broken in spirit. Somehow, still with a smirk despite the knockout, he grabbed the mic and said the words only Jake Paul could say after getting folded by Tank. "Run it back. I'll fight anyone, even Canelo." The audacity. The man had just been sent into orbit by a left uppercut, and instead of licking his wounds, he was already calling out one of the greatest boxers of the last 20 years. That's either madness or genius, and with Jake Paul, the line is razor thin. The boxing legends wasted no time chiming in. Andre Ward, the undefeated Hall of Famer, said bluntly, Jake's tough, no doubt, but if he wants to be taken seriously, he needs to fight real contenders, no shortcuts. Translation: no more circus fights, no more skipping lines. If Paul wants to stay in this sport, he has to swim with the sharks for real. And of course, Logan Paul had his brother's back immediately. He jumped into the ring, hugged Jake, and told reporters, "He stood with Tank, respect that. My brother went to war with one of the best pound-for-pound fighters alive. That's courage." You could hear the emotion in Logan's voice. For him, it wasn't about wins or losses. It was about the fact that Jake dared to step into the lion's den. Love them or hate them, the Paul brothers know how to spin any moment into something bigger than just boxing. But to really understand how we even got here, you've got to rewind the tape.
Doesn't make a ton of sense. But again, as far as a sport fight is concerned, I want to make sure I make that clear. Again, this is not me hating on it, because I do think that both guys have been very upfront with what they're doing.
This whole storm started months earlier with Jake Paul's shocking victory over Mike Tyson. Yeah, that Mike Tyson. On paper, it was madness. A 58-year-old former heavyweight destroyer stepping into the ring with a 28-year-old YouTuber turned boxer. But it happened, and the results shook the sport.
At what point does size matter so much, though, where it can't be overcome, Shakur? And is it in this case here, when you've got what is like a 70-pound difference between these two guys?
The fight ended in controversy. Paul's youth and conditioning carried him through, but many felt the judges were too generous. Critics called it a robbery. Eddie Hearn, never shy about firing shots, said it was disrespectful to Tyson and to the sport itself. But no matter what anyone said, the record books showed Jake Paul with his hand raised over Iron Mike. And that single win changed everything. It gave him the leverage, the momentum, and the audacity to demand fights that would have been unthinkable before.
This one's a little too much, right? This one is crazy because of the massive weight difference.
And that's where the controversy grew even louder. Was Jake Paul disrespecting legends by even daring to call them out? Or was he doing what no one else could, forcing the sport to evolve, dragging old school fighters into a new era where numbers spoke louder than titles? By the time the night ended in Atlanta, fans were split down the middle. Some said Jake Paul had finally been exposed, that Tank Davis showed the gap between hype and real boxing. Others argued the opposite, that Jake proved he belonged by surviving Davis's storm longer than most expected.
Anything happen, and I'm gonna show you and him back.
But one thing was undeniable. This wasn't just another fight. It was a cultural event. Mike Tyson's shadow was still looming. Canelo's name was still hanging in the air, and Jake Paul, even with his head bouncing off the canvas, was still the center of every conversation. Tank Davis had the knockout, Jake Paul had the spotlight, and boxing once again had been turned upside down. The knockout was barely 5 minutes old before the boxing world exploded with reactions. And let's be clear, these weren't quiet tweets or polite press releases. The legends, the critics, the rivals, everyone had something to say.
I said, if I have to choose between Jake versus Joshua or Jake versus Tank, I'm taking Jake versus Joshua just because they're closer in weight.
Evander Holyfield, the man who went toe-to-toe with Mike Tyson in the 90s and literally lost part of his ear in the process, sent a warning shot straight at Jake Paul. "Don't underestimate Tyson's power," he said. Even at 58, Holyfield reminded everyone that Tyson's hands are still nuclear weapons. Translation: beating an older Tyson once doesn't mean Jake should tempt fate by trying again. If anyone knows the danger of underestimating Mike, it's Holyfield.
Jake Paul and Davis. I will watch it. It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's all of us getting together to go to the circus for the evening. I think the reason why there's pushback against it when Jake does it is because Jake, and obviously tactfully, is going like, what are you talking about? This guy's a world champion.
This fight was also about Tank Davis, and he walked out of Atlanta with his legacy shining even brighter. Tank proved once again that he's still the most feared knockout artist under 140 pounds. Critics had whispered that he wasn't taking risks, that he was protecting his record. But knocking out Jake Paul on the biggest stage of the year silenced all of that. He showed that no matter how much hype surrounds a fight, real power doesn't lie. Jake's rise, though, is the strangest part of this entire story. Think about it. He started as a YouTuber making prank videos. Then, somehow, he fought and beat a 58-year-old Mike Tyson. After that, he stood in the same ring as Gervonta Davis, one of boxing's most terrifying champions. That trajectory alone makes no sense. And yet, here we are. And that's where we hit the bigger question. Is Jake Paul a real contender, or is he just spectacle? That's the fight within the fight. On one side, the purists who believe only champions and true contenders deserve the spotlight. On the other side, the fans who don't care about rankings or sanctioning bodies and they just want drama, knockouts, and chaos, and Jake Paul brings that in buckets. And through it all, Tank Davis reminded us why pure, devastating power still rules the sport. One perfectly timed uppercut ended the noise. One knockout reminded everyone what boxing is really about. Like this video and hit the subscribe button to get more updates.